So dear students, now in the open elective course Biomedical Instrumentation, we are going to see about the electrocardiogram. So as I told you already, in Unit 1, we are not going to study about the instrumentation of the ECG, whether we are going to study about the origin of the potentials. Origin of the potentials and some basic characteristics. Characteristics in the sense I told while explaining the syllabus, the amplitude and frequency, and what are the information that are fetched from the ECG, electrocardiogram, that we are going to see today. So cardio means heart, that is the name electrocardiogram. Electrocardiogram is a waveform that is arising from the heart. So I have drawn the basic diagram of a heart. The anatomy of the heart I have shown through a simple block diagram. What happens here is the impure blood from all the parts of the body. So that is called as the veins. The blood vessels that connect to the heart is called as the veins. The impure blood from other parts of the body that come through the veins to the right atrium. So the right side of the heart deals with the impure blood. So the top two layers of the heart are called as the atria and the bottom layers of the heart are called as the ventricles. So the impure blood enters the right atria and that is pumped to the right ventricles. So atria are merely pumping chambers that pump the blood from only from atria to ventricles, whereas the ventricles pumps the blood to the lungs or to other organs of the body. In the flow, what happens is, after the impure blood comes from right atria to right ventricles, the right ventricles pump the blood, impure blood, to the lungs. Lung is the organ where the purification of the blood happens. Purification and oxygenation. What happens is, the blood is oxygenated here and the oxygenated blood is taken to left atria. So the left side of the heart deals with the pure blood. From the left atria it is pumped to the left ventricles, and from the left ventricles it is pumped to the entire of the human body. So this is the simple block diagram of the heart to understand, and we will see. The heart serves as a four-chambered pump for the circulatory system. Its main pumping function is supplemented by the ventricles. The main pumping function is given by the ventricles, whereas the atria simply pump the blood from atria to ventricles. The atria are merely the chambers to store the blood during the time the ventricles are pumping. For a mere storage for some time, atria is there. The resting or filling phase of the heart cycle is referred to as the diastole, whereas the contractile or pumping phase is called as the systole. So there is an alternative process of systole and diastole. The resting or filling phase, when the blood is filled in the top layers, atria, that is called as the filling phase of the atria. So when the atria fills up, what happens is the ventricles contracts and pushes the blood to the other organs. So that is called the systole and diastole. The resting phase and contracting phase, contractile phase. So diastole and systole. When the heart compresses, that is called as the systole. Contractile phase is called as the systole. So alternative phases of systole and diastole happens in atria and ventricles alternatively, so that there is a synchronous waveform that is produced. This synchrony should not be disturbed. That is, when the atria is filling up, the ventricles will contract. When the ventricle is filling up, the atria should contract. This coordinated contraction of the atria and ventricles is set up by a specific pattern of electrical activation. So this specific activation is given by musculature of these structures. Considering the heart as a bioelectric source, the source strength is directly related to the active muscle mass at the moment. The electric strength at the body at that particular moment depends upon the entire muscle mass that is contracting or expanding. That is a number of active myocardial cells. Myocardial cells in the sense, myo means muscles, heart muscles. How much heart muscles are active at that moment. Based on that, the electrical impulses will be produced. The strength of the electrical impulse depends upon the muscle mass, how much muscle mass is active at a particular moment. So before going into all those details, diastole and systole we studied, and how the ECG signal is produced based on the muscle mass and all we see. And before that we will see the actual anatomy of the heart also. You need not memorize all these things. This is for illustration purpose only. For exams you need not draw this, whereas this picture you should have in mind to give the explanation. So just like the block diagram, here also you have the right atria and then left ventricles, right ventricle. Of course this is the left atria. The top is called as the left atria, left ventricle, right ventricle and right atrium. So that is shown as a simple four-chambered block diagram. Here it is a little complicated, whereas the sinoatrial node is very important. What is this sinoatrial node? Is nothing but that acts like the battery to the heart. The impulses has to be supplied to simultaneous contraction and expansion of the heart. Just like the mobile phone has a battery for its power, the sinoatrial node gives the impulses to each of the layer of the heart for simultaneous or complementary contraction and expansion. Why I am specifically using the word complementary is when the atria are contracting, the ventricles expand and vice versa. So here you have a sinoatrial node that supplies the impulses to the heart. Let us have a look at the other organs of the heart also. There is something called as a superior vena cava and right ventricle we told already. Pulmonary artery is one of the blood vessel. Likewise the organs, the different parts you can infer from the heart. The rhythmic cardiac impulse originates in the pacemaking cells in the sinoatrial node. This is called as a natural pacemaker. Sinoatrial node is called as a natural pacemaker. Located at the junction of the superior vena cava and right atrium. Superior vena cava and right atrium. This is the right atrium, superior vena cava. At the junction of that there is a sinoatrial node. Note that there are three specialized pathways here. Anterior, middle and posterior between the sinoatrial node and atrioventricular nodes. Why these three specialized pathways are there? Because of to carry the electrical impulses from the atria, throughout the atria, these pathways are there. The impulse passes from the sinoatrial node into the atria, the entire atria, to activate first the right and left atrium. So from the sinoatrial node to the entire atria, the impulses are carried out by the three specialized nodes. So each fiber consists of contractile myofibrils. Myofibrils means I told the explanation. Fibrils means fibers. Myo means muscle fibers. Cardiac myofibers means heart muscle fibers that follow the axis of the cell from one end to another end. So this is what is the diagram. This is what is the simple figure of the myofibrils. So how the impulses are passing through the muscle fibers, that is shown by a simple diagram like this. After the arterial excitation, the ventricular excitation happens, which on the whole is shown by the ECG waveform as described below. So after the atria gets excited, next the ventricles should get excited. That is what is given in the sentence here. After the atrial excitation, the ventricular excitation happens, which on the whole is shown by the ECG waveform. The entire ECG waveform is nothing but atrial excitation and ventricular excitation. And what are they? We can say P wave. P wave is nothing but atrial depolarization. What is by depolarization? As we saw in the first unit in beginning, from resting state to action state, that is called as a depolarization. From resting to action, that is called as the depolarization. When the atria depolarizes, what happens is P wave occurs. P wave is representing the atrial depolarization and ventricular depolarization. After atria, the ventricle contracts. That is called as the ventricular action potential or ventricular depolarization. So that ventricular depolarization is given by QRS complex. So after P wave, QRS complex. You can read like this: atrial depolarization, ventricular repolarization. Atrial resting to action potential, ventricular resting to action potential. That is given by the QRS complex. And the QRS complex is of course the one having the highest amplitude in the entire ECG waveform. If you want to calculate the time period of a ECG waveform, time period in the sense how much is a particular cycle, one cycle of a ECG waveform, you have to measure the distance between one R wave to another R wave, because that is the highest in amplitude. The cycle of the ECG wave or the time period of the ECG wave can be calculated by the distance between two consecutive R waves. And ventricular repolarization. What is repolarization? Again from action state to resting state, action potential to resting potential, that is called as the repolarization, that is shown by the T waveform. And there are standard values for the time period, for the time duration and amplitude of each segment of these waveforms. For example, the PR interval should be, PR interval in the sense from the occurrence of P wave to R wave, this gap should be of 0.12 to 0.22 seconds, and QRS duration, the total duration of the QRS waveform should be less than 0.12 seconds. Likewise, everything is being measured. In fact, you have a chart for all these. What should be the amplitude, typical amplitude of a P waveform? So first we discussed here about the time duration. Here we have the amplitude. P wave should be 0.25 millivolts. R wave should be 1.6 millivolts. This is 1.6, this is 0.25. And the Q wave, what about Q wave? 25% of R wave. Q wave should be 25% of R wave. And T wave is 0.1 to 0.5 milliseconds. T wave should be 0.1 to 0.5 milliseconds. And what is the PR interval and QRS interval? That is also shown in the figure. Of course, each is taken from different sources. There may be little bit deviation in the values, but not much deviations. And how that is understood, how the ECG waveform is understood, we have seen now. And apart from that, what are the abnormalities that can be diagnosed from the typical ECG waveform? That also we have. If PQ segment is greater than 0.22 seconds, PQ is greater than so maximum value should be 0.22. If that is greater than 0.22 seconds, the first degree atrioventricular block happens. Atrioventricular block happens. If QRS complex duration is greater than 0.1 seconds, QRS complex is greater than less than 0.12 seconds, it should be. If it is greater than 0.1 seconds, what happens is bundle block. So QRS complex is very important. So that is the region of the ECG waveform which holds more information. Then ST segment, if it is high in amplitude, there is myocardial infraction. Depressed ST segment. If ST segment means this is a ST segment, that is depressed means amplitude gets reduced. In that case, near to 0, that is called as coronary insufficiency. And the PQRST pulse strain. If the PQRST pulse strain, the entire pulse is not in the shape itself, then that is called as a ventricular fibrillation. What is by fibrillation is nothing but quiver of ventricles. I told a particular rhythm is there. The atria contracts, the ventricle expands. Diastole, this is systole. Likewise, it should be complementary in action. Likewise, there is no complementary and synchronous action between the atria and ventricles. That is called as a ventricular fibrillation. Rather than a coordinated movements, there is a quiver of ventricles. That is shown by a PQRST. If PQRST waveform is not there, like this, but instead there is a pulse strain. Pulse strain means instead of this beautiful waveform, you have some pulses only. Then in that case, that is called as a ventricular fibrillation. So this is what is that you have to entirely study about the ECG. We start from the very block diagram of the heart, how a heart looks like. Rather than the anatomy of the heart, we studied how a heart looks like, and of course the anatomy of the heart also we studied. I told it is not to remember for you for the exams, only the figure you can have in your mind and you can write. What you can write? Sinoatrial node is a natural pacemaker. It delivers the impulses to the heart. Through 3 nodes, the impulses are carried to the entire atria, and from the atria the impulses pass to the ventricles. And after that, of course, you have to memorize and practice this ECG waveform, and what are the durations and what are the amplitudes. Every typical value you have to remember, and if that goes abnormal, what is the disease diagnosis. So this does justice for the heading origin and characteristics. Origin in the sense how the impulses are arising from the heart. For that only we studied the anatomy of the heart in detail. So which anatomy? You can draw only this. No, not necessary to draw the anatomy like this, which is not possible also for engineering students. So with this we conclude the ECG under the section origin and characteristics of biopotentials, and next session we will go for the electroencephalography.